Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Two quick things. Make sure you download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. We are an EWTN affiliate, so you'll have all that content also. And hey, if you like what Joe and I do, we do our interviews and social and political commentary on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Twitter. So help us out. Like, subscribe, share, and all that fun stuff. So Joe and I always say we're going into the breach, okay? One way that you go into the breach is you talk to someone about converting from wherever they were to the Catholic Church, okay? Because that's not a real popular thing to do in the modern world. However, our current guest, and who we are very pleased and honored was gracious enough to join us on the show, is Tammy Peterson, and she just converted to the Catholic faith. And Joe and I saw it on Twitter, and I told Joe, I said, I'm going to reach out to Tammy Peterson. I said, because I want to talk to anybody. I want to know the reasons why they would come into the church, especially someone who's as popular as Tammy is. So I just want to give a quick bio. Some of you may not be familiar with her. Tammy Peterson, after graduating from high school in 1979, she moved to Central Canada, where she worked, studied, and was married in 1989. Tammy raised two children with her husband, Jordan Peterson, and has three grandchildren whom she adores. Tammy attended university in the 80s and 90s, studying kinesiology and visual art. She owned and operated a massage therapist business for 30 years. She's taught Hatha yoga and practiced Kundalini yoga for over 20 years. Most recently, Tammy also spent 3 years working as a logistics consultant for her husband, Jordan, organizing his daily itinerary on his sold-out worldwide book tour. They travel the world. They give talks in 140 cities. In 2019, and we're going to get into this in the conversation, in 2019, Tammy suffered and recovered from a near-fatal illness, and this experience changed and deepened her understanding of how life ought to be lived. And the last 18 months, she toured the United States, Australia, and Europe to over 250 cities with her husband. This time, she opened the lectures at most shows with her personal reflections on the chapters of the book Beyond Order, an Antidote to Suffering. Tammy Peterson, welcome to the Frontline with Joe and Joe, and welcome to the Roman Catholic Church. God bless you, sister. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. Just
absolutely.
Let's get going.
This is going to be a great conversation. Joe Resinello, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we'll jump in.
Tammy, we always start the conversations with the prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother, the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Well, God calls interesting people, Tammy. I'll be honest with you. And I think converts are the most interesting. We could start with St. Paul. St. Paul was a convert, and he changed the world. In many ways, Joe and I are. We were always Catholic because we're Italian. You eat pasta on Sunday and you go to church. It's kind of the way. If you're from New Jersey, that's what happens. But it never sunk in. There's a moment in life that you make that decision. It's personal. And I just want to say that. And I could also say this. I made that decision at 22 years old. It was the best decision of my life. I'm 53 now. I never would have met my wife. I have 5 children. None of that would have happened. None of it if I continued on the road that I was on. Best decision of my adult life was to take my Catholic faith serious. It's 30 years. I just want to tell you that God has a plan for you. Mark my words. He called you specifically. Trust me on that. And you will do something, guaranteed. With that said, let's talk about your beginnings growing up. Religiously speaking, what was the tradition you grew up in? Break that down for our audience. I think that's a good starting place.
Okay. So I grew up in a family of 4 kids. I was the youngest. My grandmothers, they were Protestants, both of them. My grandmother on my dad's side, she played the organ in the church until she was 93 when she passed away. So that was I never went to church with her, but she had her faith. I lived 350 miles north of her, so I watched from afar. And then my mother's mother, she sang in the choir till she was in a nursing home. So both those ladies went to church every Sunday. And my grandmother on my mom's side, she was quite thoughtful. So she would tell me sometimes what she was thinking about in terms of her religious faith. And it was my mother's oldest sister who introduced me to yoga when I was 13 and took me from the church. Now I had pretty much left because my siblings left home when I was 9, 10, and 12. And then I was at home with my parents who didn't go to church, and I stopped going. So once my siblings weren't going anymore and weren't active in their, my sister was active in Canadian Girls in Training, CGIT. We all went to CGIT. When she left in grade 12 and went off to university, and that took her from 400 miles away. So they didn't just go down the street to university. They were gone. My siblings were gone. They came home at Christmas and they came home at Easter. But other than that, I didn't see them unless I traveled far to see them. So I was left there with my parents, and we lived in a northern natural gas and oil town. It had some farming. There were 2,000 people there. There was a small community college associated with it, thank goodness, but it taught Harvey Davidson motorcycle mechanics and golf course turf management. So it was, a particular regional college. But thank goodness it was there, because we had people come from Kenya. We had people for beekeeping. We had people come from all over the world. And that was our gate into, there's a world out there, not just us northern people who are trying to stay warm in the winter, is mostly what we spent all of our time doing. But I would say that my religious faith was, it was something that I meditated on, but it wasn't something that was really outwardly taught to me. My mom and dad sent me to Bible studies in the summertime now and then. It was kind of like a kids' camp. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning the stories of the Bible. I like to sing in the church, so I like This Little Light of Mine and all the little stories and the songs that the little kids learned. But I left the church when I was 13, just like a lot of kids do. Like a lot of kids, they don't understand what they are supposed to be doing there and what should hold them there. And the world pulls them away, as it pulls people away at all ages, but it definitely seems to pull teenagers away. And so at that point, I decided to start doing yoga. My aunt introduced me to yoga one summer. I went out to stay with her and her family because her kids were the same age as me. And she had us tear down a pig barn in the mornings. And then she taught us yoga in the afternoons. And after 2 weeks, she sent me home with a book, and I did yoga every day. But I was an athletic kid, and it seemed reasonable that I would do something physical and that it would have a spiritual component. I thought that kind of made sense to me. Although, because I was from a Christian background, the whole idea of the spirituality of yoga was, I don't think it was easily understood. And so I did my best to learn how to meditate and to do the exercises. They call them asanas. So I became strong and balanced. And I also learned to sit and concentrate, say, on a candle and breathe. And so these were good formative exercises, because by the time I came to pray, I had a practice of sitting. And that practice of sitting and attending was a smooth transition to prayer. And so my childhood was loosely spiritual, but it wasn't a good dogmatic teaching of religion.
Tammy Peterson is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. We're talking about her conversion to the Catholic Church. Tammy, let me ask you this. The church teaches, okay, that there are rays of truth in all religions, okay? But obviously the church proposes the fullness of the truth, all right? That she possesses the fullness of the truth. So I'm just to piggyback off what you said, I always think in my mind, based on some of the things you were saying, because it kind of mirrors where I was at, is we're all pulled by the world. That's why the prodigal son is probably the most popular parable there is. And you go out there and you go off into that dark place. I did it. Joe just described. Joe, thank God, came back earlier. I kind of suffered a little bit more feeding the pigs, if you know where I'm going with that. But I could have gone anywhere, and I actually thought I was going to maybe not come back to the Catholic Church. I remember putting my foot in my mouth with my best friend. I said at one point, I said, I'm never going back to the Catholic Church. About 6 months later, I was in confession. Talk about that, because with those rays of truth, regardless of the worldview or the religion, those could be pulling, but you chose the Catholic Church. Give us our audience an idea of how you came to that conclusion.
In the last couple of years that I was going to church, I had a question that I posed just to myself. I never asked anyone else. Where's Mother Mary in all of this?
You're speaking our language now.
Where's Mother Mary? And it might have been a feminist question, right? Because who's this God and Jesus Christ? But where's the woman? Where's the woman? So it might have been coming from, because feminism was taught, and in my family there was some feminism. I mean, we were Protestants. We were raised Protestants. But my grandmother on my mom's side, she had been a Catholic and changed our religion to Protestant. And I didn't know that until I was much older. But I think that she had been reading the feminist narrative brew that we've all been taught. And I think maybe she felt like there was, who knows, too much judgment there, and she wanted something that was kinder and easier for her. But I really felt like there was something missing. I couldn't understand where Mother Mary was. And so I think that was the first, now I feel like that was my first indication that I do have Catholic roots, that I was craving the love and the support of Mother Mary. And I had no idea what that came from, because I was never taught that. So I think it really was in my genetics, in my DNA. I think that that was a basis for who I was. So in all those years that I did yoga, and I didn't go, I did go to church a little bit. I went to church. I went to a Protestant church when I moved to Montreal. I went for a whole year, and the first Sunday of the next year, the priest gave the same exact sermon that he'd given the year before, and that was enough for me to say, oh, I found something that negates all of this. I don't need to come to church. He's not going to teach me anything. And I gave it up again. So it didn't really take much for me when I was young to find fault. I would find fault, and then finding fault, I'd separate myself from God, from the teachings of the church. Again, I would separate myself and then go on my way. My father taught me to be very self-sufficient. He taught us all to be self-sufficient. When in the 70s, when we were going out with our friends, he would say, make sure you're smart and make sure you come home. But it was up to me. He always taught us that it was up to us to get ourselves out of trouble and to find our way forward. There was never any teaching of that there would be help from above. That wasn't. And it's funny, because I know he read the Bible as a little boy. And I think that my father had faith, because now he's 93 and he's the most peaceful old man. Doesn't seem to matter what kind of challenges come his way, he accepts them. And so I think deep down he's a very religious man, but he never shared that with us. He told us that we were the masters of our destiny, really. And that's a very enlightened idea, that we have everything that we need. And that's obviously not true. It didn't work for me in the end at all. And I think any of us who get to the point where we get on our knees and convert realize that we don't have it in ours, that we're not enough.
If you're just joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, we're being joined by Tammy Peterson. We're discussing her conversion to the Catholic Church. Joe Rossinello.
There's a lot to unpack there. I want to talk about truth, the kernels of truth, which are found in religions. The Catholic Church acknowledges that, but the church, as Joe Pasillo rightfully said, contains the fullness of truth. I want to talk a little bit about absolute truth versus relativism. And I think this is at the heart of what you and your husband do and why it's successful. Because truth is written on the hearts of all men and women. It's there. And when you speak the truth, there's something about it. It's like a bell. It resonates with people. And the church contains that, the fullness of truth. Pope Benedict XVI, I don't know if you may have read a lot of what he has written extensively on that. In my opinion, he'll one day become a doctor of the church, a brilliant man. However, in the world, if you say to somebody in our circles, professional circles, there is such a thing as absolute truth, they'll look at you like you're crazy. You're a fundamentalist. You're nuts. No, 2 + 2 is 4 in Canada. 2 + 2 is 4 in Africa. 2 + 2 is 4 in America.
In North New Jersey?
It's 5 in New Jersey.
It's 5 in New Jersey.
But I'll tell you what, it's the truth. Talk about that, because I think that is an avenue that a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, are acknowledging God. And I think what you guys have been doing has been a gateway to that, because you're talking about universal truths without using the God term. Please expand on that and how that, I think, resonates with human beings.
So when I was about 26, I met Jordan when I was 8 years old. So we were childhood friends. So I knew him. We were in the same classroom. We played, baseball and in the neighborhood. But then I left home, and so did he. I think he was maybe 16 when he left home. I was 18. But when I was 26, he asked me to marry him a couple of times. I said, not yet. I never said no, but I said not yet, because I wasn't ready. And finally I was ready. I thought, I can't put this off any longer. And I've probably been misdirected in thinking I should put it off this long. So I went to Montreal to see him. I was in Ottawa. It's only 2-hour drive away. And I hung around him for a bit, and then he asked me to marry him again. And I said yes this time, which kind of shocked him. And then he didn't know what to do. Because once
you said yes, and he was blown away. What do I do now?
He was caught, right? He was caught by them. He chased me until I caught him.
Oh, that's great.
But he said, we can't get married unless we tell the truth. I said, oh, wow, no one's ever said that to me before. So I went home, back to Ottawa. I had to finish my degree. I had a semester left. And so I thought about that. I'd been given a New Testament Bible when I was in CGIT when I was 13. I was given a Bible. So I carried it. And I had it with me, right? So I kept it with me, which is interesting. So I carried it on the inside pocket of my coat for those 6 months. And I looked at my life to see what I was doing, if everything was okay, and if I was leading a good life, and it seemed like I was leading a good life, and I thought maybe I could do this, tell the truth. And so I went back to him and I said, yes, let's get married and I'll tell the truth. And that was the basis for our marriage, was that we were going to tell the truth. And so we started down that path and tried to share everything that was on our minds. And if we shared what was on our minds, we discussed what had come up until we had a resolution. And so we tried not to leave anything under the rug. But, you know, it wasn't complete. It wasn't complete. I was telling the truth, but I still could think things and maybe not do things that I thought I should do, sins of omission. So I was still not exactly so devoted that I wasn't making any errors, or if I was making errors, trying to right them right away through prayer and through, you know, getting down on my knees and admitting that I'm a sinner. So I wasn't there yet. I was still skating around thinking, well, you know, I can probably run this show, and I can probably get things done, and I can figure this out. And so although I was trying to tell the truth, I still had my hand on the driving wheel, right? I was still careening down the road, you could say, careening down the road. And but I didn't do too bad. I got married, so that was good. And I had 2 kids, which I really wanted. I really wanted children. So I had my 2 kids, and so things were good. You know, my daughter became ill when she was young, and that shook me, because I had some wild idea when I was young that I would get married to the perfect man and I would have perfect children, right? Because I was this young, naive woman, and I wasn't going to make the mistakes my parents made. You know, I wasn't going to make the mistakes my parents made. In fact, when I left them, I told them I wasn't coming back. And that's a sign, right? That's a sign that you'll be back in no time flat, when you stomp your feet and tell the world what you're going to do. So I had my kids. I was married. I'd been through university. I'd graduated. And I think graduation from university was important, because you have to graduate in order to go to the next level. If you quit before you're done, then you just repeat the mistake. You're just repeating the mistakes of the past. So I graduated. I began being a massage therapist, and I did that massage therapy until really my kids were born. And then I didn't really have a lot of patience for my clients, because I was so tired and busy with my kids. Clients would come who were in pain, and I'd think, yeah, you think you're tired, I'm tired. And I thought, well, I better not do this massage therapy, this work, while my kids are young. So I stayed home with my kids, which I wanted to do anyway. And, you know, I wanted to baptize my kids, but I didn't do it. And I wanted to take my kids to church, but I didn't do it. I decided not to pay attention to those things that meant a lot to me. For some reason, I didn't feel that what I wanted and needed was important enough that I had to put it into action. I didn't take my intuition as sacred and understand that those things that are deep inside me that I want, they're not actually mine. They come from a place of knowing that is given to me, and I still wasn't there, right? I still wasn't there. So no baptism and no church for my children or for us. And, you know, that's the way it goes. I take responsibility for it. That's all you can do. I can take responsibility for it. I don't blame anyone, because it was my choice. And I think that that's an important thing to understand. When you go through your life and you look back on what's happened, you have to take responsibility for it and let all those other people go that you would like to blame, and realize that we have a hand in our destiny, and we have a hand in what next step we're taking. We have to pay attention. Are we taking that next step because we're inspired to take it? Or are we taking it because we want control, or we're greedy, or all the things, all the sins that we can commit, or we're lustful, or whatever it is that we're after. If we can step back from that and understand that we could pause and find out what it is that comes from deep inside us, and it might not be something we want to do, but that is the right thing to do, then our lives go a lot better. But I wasn't there yet. I wasn't there yet. I was in my 30s and I was still running the show. I thought that I was pretty healthy. My daughter wasn't so healthy. That was a problem. But I was still pretty healthy. So I thought maybe I was doing all right. And that took me for quite a while, until later, for both Jordan and I, when things started to change in our society. Because when things started to change in our society, then, Jordan was a clinical psychologist, and he'd come home and he'd say, oh, my clients, they're being bothered at work. One of them was working in a bank, and the management was asking them to follow some political correct doctrines, and DEI was starting to be instilled in the university, and he was starting to feel hemmed in. And he came down one morning and he said, oh, I feel like maybe I should say something publicly. And I said, yeah. I said, you've been talking about this stuff to me for 30 years. Why don't you talk publicly? Let's see what happens. And that was the day that he put out a video saying that he would not pay attention to compelled speech, that as far as he was concerned, his words were his words and they were sacred, and there was no way he would say someone else's words. And it just went viral. And
Tammy, let's leave it there for a second. We're going to take a quick break, okay? And then we're going to come back, because we're going to pick up on that about truth. Remember that, because we're glad you touched on that. So Tammy Peterson is with us here at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello, Way in the Breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Now, please download the app from Veritas. Share it with your friends. If you're watching this on social media, Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We are on Facebook and YouTube until they shut us down, of course, which we know they will at some point in the future. But in the meantime, share it, help us out. We have Tammy Peterson here. We're on the topic of truth and her conversion to the Catholic Church. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. We have another great segment with Tammy. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Resinello. We're Way in the Breach with Tammy Peterson, and we were discussing her conversion to the Catholic Church and a couple of other things. Tammy, we promise we're not going to get you in too much trouble, all right? But then again, I don't know, between you and your husband, you're probably always getting in trouble. But either way, I want to pick up where we left off. Here's where I'm going with this, and I'm going to throw it right back over to you. Do you think St. John starts his gospel, in the beginning was the Word? If you read it in English, it's the Word, but he wrote it in Greek. And in Greek, the word is logos. And if you look at the definition in the Greek dictionary, logos has a lot of different meanings. There's a lot of words you could use to describe logos. Truth is one of them. Order is another one. Rationality, reason. All these things are comprised, are part of logos. Christ is obviously the logos incarnate. How much of what you were just discussing before the break, the rebellion against the truth, the rebellion against logos, do you see it that way? I don't want to get too long-winded. You know where I'm going. I'm going to throw it over to you.
Yes, it does look that way to me. And I do think, this has been happening over and over and over throughout history. I think since the Enlightenment, people have taken it upon themselves through thinking that through reason that they could lead their own lives. And I practiced that when I was young in my own way. And I found that it led me to sickness and nearly to death. And so I think what people are doing now, thinking that they don't have to adhere to truth, the word, logos, they don't have to adhere to that. We will continue to veer off in a catastrophic direction, no matter what we do, if we don't pay attention to the logos. It looks completely, it looks obvious to me now. I wouldn't have understood this, I'm sure, years ago, but traveling all over the world too, and talking to people and seeing them listen to my husband. And when he says that we have to take responsibility for ourselves, and through taking on responsibility, which is taking our cross and picking up our cross and bearing it, that's responsibility. We will find the meaning of our life there. And it's dead silent in the room. No one says a thing. It's quiet, and he knows they're listening and that it resonates with them. And it's quite fascinating, because he'll talk for an hour and a half, but when he says that, you could hear a pin drop in the room. People think, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. They know it. They know it deep down, because we have a Judeo-Christian past. Everyone has it. It's whether it's taught to us or not, it's there. Now, it's a lot easier if we're taught it. It's a lot easier to find your way if you know the scripture. But anybody can pick up the Bible at any point and find a book and a passage and read it and find meaning there. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Tammy. Joe Rossinello.
I want to unpack a couple things you said regarding the point when you and your husband said, we're going to go public and we're going to speak the truth. A couple Bible verses popped in my head. Jesus tells Peter, get out of the boat and you will walk on water. What? And he does. We need to get out of the boat. All people need to get out of the boat. We're afraid. We like our little comfortable life. No, Christ is calling us to something great. That's one. Two, Jesus is talking to fishermen. He's a carpenter. They went out and they got nothing. And he says, no, throw the net off the other side. I'm from New Jersey. This is what New Jersey fishermen would have said to him. I'm a fisherman. You're a carpenter. You stick to the hammer and nails. I'll catch the fish. But Peter said, because you said it, I'm going to do it. It made no sense, but they caught fish. There is the point that every person has to realize and make that step. And when we do and get in that space of being uncomfortable, there is where the grace of God comes in, and that's where we will bear fruit. But that takes that jumping out. And one last comment, and then I'm going to give it over to you. This is what every person needs to do, and they have to realize that. This is the call to the world. Your comments on that, because ultimately you took a right-hand turn. You could have had that comfortable life. Your husband's doing well. He's doing his thing. He said, no, I'm going to do something else. And boom, there's the lightning. Talk about it.
So there's one thing I wanted to say about telling the truth. You know, when something bothers you, often you think, you know, people say these things all the time. My kids are going to school, and I don't like what's being taught there. I don't like that. They should be teaching what I learned when I was a kid. So say that's that. And they talk about it. They talk about with their friends. They talk about with their families, but they don't do anything about it. It's something that nags at them every morning and every night, but they don't do anything about it. That's their problem. That's their problem with, and it's not something they want to do because it makes them mad. It makes them mad and they don't like what's happening there. There's something about not liking what's happening there. That's a sign. It's a sign. It's like the burning bush. And it's a place where if you attend to that place, you will find the meaning of your life. And when Jordan was bothered by what was going on in his clinical practice, the people who were complaining about their workplaces, and it was nagging at him, he saw that as a reason for him to speak out. And so that was his burning bush moment, where he saw something that called to him, and it was annoying. He could have just complained about it and done nothing, but he didn't. He decided that he would speak publicly. And when he spoke publicly, then there was an answer, because it wasn't just him who was bothered. Lots of people were bothered by this, but nobody had done anything yet. It just so happened that he made the first action in response to what was going on in our society and put his hand up and said, actually, I disagree. And many people didn't want him to say that, but there were many people who did want him to say what he said. And so it brought the conversation to the front, and it's been at the front ever since. And that was
Tammy,
2017.
Let me
Yeah.
stay there. Let me stay there 1 second, because it's just a common theme, a constant theme on our show, is the need not to simply defend. Defending is one thing, but we were talking about truth. We were talking about relativism. We were talking about the lies that are told. Talk about, as to use Joe's image of getting out of the boat. If you're in the boat, you're defending, you're hunkered down, you're just trying to defend yourself against the waves. You get out of the boat, you start attacking the lies, you start attacking the falsehoods out there, all of the I don't want to use the word, let's call it BS. Okay. I think that that's important in what you guys are doing. Is you're not just simply defending, you're attacking what is obviously wrong. Talk about, and again, along the lines of what you were just saying, the need to attack the lies, not people, but those horrible ideas that are out there.
Now it's tricky, Jordan, I was behind Jordan. I was supporting him, and my kids were supporting him too. So he felt supported in the moment where he spoke out publicly, that I wouldn't turn against him or abandon him, that I would stay there. And my son was home from college and he was at the house too, and he was staying, so and that's the thing, if you need to have community. So that was partly what church was about, was that you had community, that you had people that you could talk to when you were worried or fearful. And people have become the way our society has been set up, people are on their own a lot more than they used to be. And I think that change in our society has made it less likely that people will speak out, because if you're not feeling like someone's got your back, then it's a lot more difficult for you to stick your neck up. I mean, and there are sayings, I don't know the sayings exactly, but the one who sticks his neck up first is the one who gets his head cut off. So people know that, they know that instinctually. So what people need to do is to find people who are supportive and talk to them and support them and understand that this has to be a concerted effort. It's not, you can't sit at home and think about it and not share your worries. You have to talk to someone, tell them what you're concerned about, first of all, to get your thinking straight. Because you can't do this on your own. No one can do this on their own. So the more that you talk about things, the straighter you'll understand when you run up against trouble, and you'll understand if what you're saying is getting through to anyone. And so you have to practice. and there's the practice of prayer. There's all kinds of practice that we have in this world, and you need to practice. You need to practice telling the truth. And you can start with little things. You can start with little things at home that you aren't too afraid of, and tell the truth about those things. And the more you practice telling the truth, the more likely it'll be that you'll be able to speak up when something happens that really needs attention. But if you hide even the little things, if you hide those things and don't share them or let them go or turn the other cheek, then you won't be ready when you actually have to tell the truth. So yes, practice every day with everything, telling the truth.
Tammy Peterson is joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. We're discussing her conversion to the Roman Catholic Church on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Joe Rossinello.
There's so much that you've said, and I want to circle back to basically a theme that you kept repeating. I wasn't ready yet. I think that's a common theme with many people. And what I have found in my life is when you come to the end of yourself, that's when Christ says, and now we begin. Professional people, successful people, Western people, we're not there. Go to the so-and-so third world. I've seen a lot of it. They live there. They know God. We trust our bank accounts, our refrigerators, and our comforts. When we come to the end of ourselves, and many times that's where suffering comes in. And I'm going to lead this into this aspect of the conversation because I think you have a lot to say. I know you have a lot to say on it because you discuss it when you and your husband tour. Christ gives meaning to suffering, and suffering is a common denominator amongst every human being on this earth, and only Christianity and Jesus Christ gives meaning to it. No other religion in the way that Christ does gives meaning to that. He also gives meaning to death, which scares the living bejesus out of people, especially successful people, especially Western people. Talk about that, coming to the end of yourself, embracing suffering, and how that can be beneficial, because I think that is a missing link for Western people when it comes to accepting Jesus Christ in the Catholic Church.
We have pretty cushy life in the West. We have infrastructure that keeps all of us safe and warm and fed, and so people think, that they're comfortable. They're comfortable and nothing's going to get them because everything's taken care of. We even have, in Canada, we even have healthcare that's paid for. And so far, it's not working as well anymore, but so far. And so it's no wonder that we are tricked into thinking that we don't need to get down on our knees. And for myself, I definitely lived that life. I did have a place with my husband, and I was feeling secure. I went on tour with him, and I sat in the crowd for the first tour. I worked in logistics. I made sure he got there and he was fed and had a nap and all of that, and made sure that he got there on time and all of that. But I used to sit in the crowd and I listened. It was many, many nights. It might have been 250 nights. So I listened to all his lectures. And, I hadn't really listened that much. I'd always left him alone in his office to do his work. I didn't bother him. I made sure that he had his time he needed to work. And he talked to me when we had discussions, but I hadn't really attended and sat there and listened to everything he had to say. And he did speak a lot about biblical stories, not as much as he's doing now, but he was speaking quite a bit about how the Bible teaches us what we need to know. And I listened, but I was wondering what I was doing sitting in the audience, listening to all of this, but I listened, even though I wondered why I was there. And during that time, I was diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma in my left kidney. And I was told that it's not a cancer that kills people. It's treatable. It's treatable, and that I didn't have to rush home for surgery. So we didn't. But at the end of the tour, we went home, and I had surgery. And after a month, I was feeling pretty good. I was getting a lot better, and I started to get a pain in my side. And I went back to the surgeon, and they had looked more carefully at what had happened to me, and they did and they biopsied what they had taken out of me, and they found out that I had a rare type of cancer that was lethal, that it was terminal, and that they told me I had 10 months to live. So I was in the office with my husband, and we were pretty shocked. So was the surgeon. He wasn't, he was shaking. His hands were shaking. I could tell that he was not confident about the prognosis that he was giving me. And he said that this type of cancer, people don't survive it, that they usually diagnose it after they're dead. And I went home to tell my son. My son lived at the end of the street with his wife. And I went home, and I had pretty much decided that this was a reasonable prognosis, that my mother and her siblings and everyone had died young, and that maybe I would die young. So in my customary way, I thought it was up to me to accept the prognosis. But I went home, and I told my son, and I looked in his eyes when I told him, and I saw a profound grief and a love for his mother that was infinitely bigger than the love I had for myself. And at that point, I felt a worthiness to live in order to serve my son and my family. And I felt cynicism and self-doubt lift off my shoulders. I didn't know what it was, but that in the following years, that's what I've come to understand, is that was what was holding me down. It was holding my shoulders down, and that lifted up, and I was filled with the Holy Spirit. And I realized that it was not up to me. It was only up to God. In fact, it wasn't even up to the doctors. It was only up to God whether I lived or died. And it was up to me to accept treatment gratefully, and to be grateful for any help that would come my way, and for me to pray and accept my illness as necessary and the next right thing. And so I just decided that that's how I would live my life. And so that's how I have lived now for the last 4 years, is that I get up in the morning and I ask for God's will. And if there are any challenges for me that day, I am grateful for them, and try to set myself right with my higher power, and go through the day hoping that I will be aware enough that if something comes up, I can attend to it properly and be of service. So in
Tammy Peterson.
a minute,
Yeah.
that's what I did.
Tammy Peterson's joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Man, we could talk to you for hours. Unfortunately, we probably have about 5 minutes left. We are talking about your conversion to the Catholic Church. So here's what I want to do. I want to throw over the last several minutes to you, but on this, what you just described to me smacks of humility. And you mentioned earlier about getting on your knees, and that requires humility, okay? Because a prideful person doesn't get on their knees to pray to God, doesn't need God. So I want you to talk about that humility and segue from that, if you would, into what the Rosary and praying the Rosary, that contemplative prayer that the church gives us, how important that was in your journey. And you got this floor for like the last 4 minutes, Tammy.
Thank you. So when I was in the hospital for complications, because they did surgery, they couldn't find, I had a leak in my abdomen from when they took all the lymph out. They couldn't find the leak, and I was, my life was draining from me. I went down 30 pounds, 35 pounds. I was really skin and bone. They put me in the hospital, and they were going to try to give me nutrition through my heart, to try to get some energy back in my body. It took me 3 days, and I woke up and realized that I was in the hospital and in a dire way. And one of my friends, she wasn't a great friend. She was just kind of someone who she'd come into our lives when Jordan was first public. She wanted some help in a political stance. She was taking a stand against the politically correct school curriculum. But then she would come and she would leave maple syrup on our doorstep and stuff. She was just being nice. She's just being nice to us. Well, when I went into the hospital, she walked into my room with a rosary that she had that had been blessed by the Pope. And she asked me if I wanted to pray the rosary. And I said, yes, that I did. And she said, oh, so you know what the rosary was? And I did. I knew what the rosary was, but I'd never prayed it before. And so every morning at 10 in the morning for 5 weeks, she came to the hospital and prayed the rosary with me and taught me to pray it together. And she would ask me who I wanted to pray for. And, I'd pray for my mother. My mother was passed away. So then I'd pray for our ancestors, or I'd pray for my husband. And so then I'd pray for all fathers, or I'd pray for my children, and I'd pray for all kids. And so she taught me to pray, and I would tell her my life story and cry, because I had been through so much suffering by then. And crying is good because it gets you through things. But the rosary, she taught me for 5 weeks, and then she left the rosary with me, and I continued to pray it every morning. And that's where my yoga practice, I think, if there was anything to take away from that, it was the practice of meditation. I turned it into a practice of prayer, and it was seamless for me to get up in the morning and pray. And so every morning I get up in the morning and I pray. And sometimes God gives you a challenge right in the morning, right in the morning. So the other day I got up in the morning and I went to get a drink of water that I need in the morning, and the water was gone. My husband had drank it. And I said to myself, how dare he drink my water? And I could feel some resentment. And I thought, where did that come from? I thought, I think I have to go to the doctor today. So maybe I'm a little bit nervous. And so I'm being angry. So I prayed the rosary and asked Mother Mary to take this resentment from me. And she did. And that was the morning that my daughters little girl who's 6 was going off to school on Monday morning, and then she would go stay with her dad for the week because they're divorced. But my daughter is pregnant and she's very emotional. And she said that when her daughter leaves on Monday morning, it really breaks her heart. And so we went out into the kitchen and got the little girl a steak, and then we were seeing her off at the door. And my husband was distracted by something on his phone. And I gently, without any resentment or anything, just said, well, we're attending right now to my daughter and her daughter because she's leaving for school. And he, was there present. And the daughter left. My daughter cried. I held her. I was able to hold her. I don't see her very often. I was able to hold her and tell her that, that it is sad that she goes, and it's okay to cry, and that it's good to find a hug when you need to cry, because it's not good to cry alone. And that moment, that just small moment of being with the Rosary in the morning so that I could set my mind straight into the goodness and the right direction, gave me the grace to attend to my husband when he needed to attend to the moment in a gentle manner and not cause any trouble.
Tammy, I apologize. We have to leave it there. Like I
That
said,
was
we could
it.
talk. This has been a fabulous conversation. Joe and I, like I said, I'm not exaggerating. I say we're overjoyed you came on the show. We're overjoyed that you are in the Catholic Church. And needless to say, if you would want to come back, you are welcome back at the front line with Joe and Joe anytime, sister.
Thank you very much. It was great. I love it.
Thank you so much. And what I will do is I have all of Tammy's social media links. She is a very well-known podcaster in her own right. So we're going to post wherever you see this. Tammy's links will be in the description box, whether it's on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Thank you again, Tammy Peterson. Thank you all out there for joining us on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.